In the heart of the savannah, where life is measured by roars and death by silence, a lion was born. He wasn't the strongest nor the fiercest, but he was the smartest, the most steadfast and ambitious. He faced kings, saw empires collapse, and walked over their ashes like an invincible shadow. Perhaps he didn't seek the throne nor chase glory, but he engraved his name in the memory of the wild in a way no one ever had before. He wasn't just a lion. He was a legend, walking on 4 legs, a ghost that survived the jaws of death and emerged with pride from the heart of battles without bowing to his opponents. This is the story of Pretty Boy, the lion who chose to live free when others chose to die for glory. In this thrilling documentary, we won't just watch, we will feel, we will tremble, and we will respect the greatness of silence and the strength of the one who remains after the roar fades. Get ready. You are about to enter the world of the Mapogo lions, some of the most brutal and blood-soaked lions in the pages of history. Before the emergence of the famous Mapogo Coalition, Pretty Boy lived an ordinary life in the wildlands that would later become part of their empire. He wasn't known by that name yet. He was a young lion, still relying on his pride, learning the laws of survival in the wild. The scent of the wind, the danger of crocodile-filled rivers, and the meanings behind roars coming from afar. He watched the older males from a distance, sensing the hierarchy of power, witnessing the cruelty that came with it. He learned early that the world was not ruled by justice but by dominance. His mother cared for him, and his siblings played with him. But the safety of childhood was temporary. All around him, the wild was merciless. Hyenas lurked, and rival males invaded. One day, the dominant male who protected them disappeared. Perhaps he was expelled or killed. From that moment, everything changed. A shadow began to loom over his pride. Over time, the bonds between him and his pride began to weaken. He felt the change in the way adult lions looked at him. They no longer saw a cub, but a rising threat. As with all young males, he was expelled from the pride by the law of nature. He began wandering alone, avoiding stronger males, surviving on leftover kills, searching for a purpose. During his journey, he met others like him, exiles, cubs cast aside by life who chose solitude. Among them were those who would later be known as Mr. T, Kinky Tail, Rasta, Scar, and Makulu. At first, they formed fragile bonds, not out of friendship, but survival. They needed each other. They had nothing. And yet, the future was open before them. With every challenge they faced together, their bond grew stronger. As for Pretty Boy, the silent observer, he began to understand the power of unity. Their lives had changed from being lonely and empty, with no food, no land, no females, into a strong, united group. Their presence together changed everything. When they moved as one, other lions took notice, hyenas fled, and herds scattered swiftly. Indeed, the group began to move with clear goals. They entered lands ruled by dominant males, testing boundaries. Pretty Boy felt the thrill of danger, but also something else. He realized they were not just wandering lions, they could become rulers. It started with nighttime scouting missions, stealing kills and leaving signs in lands not their own. Over time, some of them grew more aggressive, especially Mr. T and Kinky Tail. Their intentions focused on attacking an old coalition in the east. They heard the roars of a pride ruled by aging males and cubs, an ideal opportunity. Pretty Boy wasn't loud or expressive, but he fully understood what the rest of the group wanted. This was their moment. If they succeeded, they wouldn't just survive, they would rule. So he looked at his 5 companions, each carrying their own scars, hunger, and determination. There was no going back. The wild had cast them out, but they would return this time as invaders. Despite the rising momentum among the young lions, Pretty Boy may have hesitated. The recklessness of Mr. T and Kinky Tail troubled him. Their aggression and obsession with dominance clearly revealed their brutal nature. He had seen what happens to those who rise too quickly. The wild knows well how to slowly humiliate them. Perhaps he silently questioned whether this coalition was truly a path to survival, or a suicide led by reckless ambition. He didn't seek bloodshed for blood's sake. He knew what war between lions meant. Cubs slaughtered, mothers torn apart, males fighting to the death. He had seen it as a cub. He had smelled the scent of rotting wounds and corpses left behind by fallen kings. Later, when the moment came, when they neared enemy territory, Pretty Boy remained calm, while the others roared with excitement. Some surely noticed his silence, especially Scar, who didn't think he was ready. But Pretty Boy avoided him. Deep down, he didn't want war, but he had no choice. He knew he couldn't face the wild alone again. As for Makulu, the oldest among them, he wasn't the loudest or most violent either. His strength was in his long experience and sharp focus, reflected in the way others moved when he stepped forward. Pretty Boy watched him closely to learn. Makulu had survived horrors no one else had seen. He carried the calm of a lion who had faced death and returned stronger. One evening, before the first real confrontation, Pretty Boy found himself walking beside him. There was no fiery roar, only silence. Their steps in the dark were accompanied by the distant sounds of herds, while Makulu pressed forward with deep determination and one phrase echoing in his mind: "Either we do it together, or we don't do it at all." Those words were enough. He didn't promise them victory, nor glorify the fight. He only thought of their unity, the only weapon they had against the cruelty of the wild. Alone, each one of them was doomed. But united, as 6 strong lions, they could become something else. Something never seen in lion coalitions before. In that moment, Pretty Boy realized that the presence of Makulu gave him stability and resolve. He didn't need to roar the loudest or lead the charge. He only had to stand with his brothers when the moment came. And that moment was coming fast. And so, the 6 males entered enemy lands under the cover of darkness. The scent of the dominant males was still present, but faint, a sign of their weakening hold. The pride they targeted quickly surrendered, previously protected by kings whose strength had faded and influence had withered. At that time, their coalition had no name yet. They weren't the Mapogo. They were just 6 young males, driven by hunger and led by the goal of survival. Their first fight came quickly, roars tearing through the night as the aging males charged at dawn, trying to defend their legacy, but they were no match. One was killed instantly, the other fled. The weak cubs were crushed between the jaws of these 6 killers. The lionesses initially joined the aging males and fought fiercely, but soon surrendered. The coalition claimed the pride with ease and force. Pretty Boy fought alongside his brothers with a silent but ruthless style. He didn't indulge in chaos like Mr. T, who ripped through enemies with savage intensity. Instead, he was precise, strategic, striking where needed, retreating when necessary. When it was all over, he didn't celebrate. He stood at the edge of the plains, gazing over the land that now belonged to them. One by one, they snatched prides from their enemies. Their reputation spread like wildfire. Lions across the region whispered about the black-maned ghosts who left no cub alive, no king breathing. Pretty Boy was there in every battle, every roar, every moment the balance of power shifted. He was no longer a wanderer, no longer hesitant. He had become a conqueror, a member of the most feared coalition in modern wild history. Yet, in quiet moments, he still carried the burden of this path. what it had cost, and what it would cost. The future wasn't lit with glory. He preferred survival and caution over arrogance. As the land expanded, so did the challenges. Dominance was not peace, but the beginning of a new war, a war of patience and endurance. The Mapogo coalition controlled vast territories, commanding several prides, pushing their borders further than any group had dared before. But each day was a new test. Pretty Boy quickly learned that strength alone wasn't enough to keep the throne. Tension began to rise within the coalition. Mr. T and Kinky Tail were always pushing for more. Insatiable, relentless, more brutal and unpredictable. Rasta and Scar became more isolated. Makalu tried to keep order, but barely succeeded. In the heart of this storm, Pretty Boy stood firm. He was respected because he never let bloodlust consume him. The lionesses trusted him more than the others. He was often seen lying close to cubs, alert but non-aggressive. He was the opposite of the chaos the others brought. Meanwhile, enemies were everywhere. Nomadic males trying to sneak into Mapogo lands, former kings plotting revenge, young coalitions forming in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. But Mapogo's response was always brutal. They tore their enemies apart with terrifying speed. Pretty Boy was always present. He might not have started the fight, but he never missed one. His presence balanced the scales. If Mr. T was fire and death, Pretty Boy was control and command. One day, one of their toughest challenges came from 3 strong young males circling the borders of their land. They were bold, organized, a clear sign that the new generation was watching and learning. Still, the Mapogo chased them relentlessly. But the message was clear. Time was shifting, and the balance would soon tip. Inside the coalition, cracks had already begun to spread, especially when Mr. T and Kinky Tail broke off, forming their own unit and leaving the others behind. That left Pretty Boy with Makulu, Rasta, and Scar. It wasn't just a split, it was the start of a collapse, a fracture in a fortress built on resolve and blood. Yet Pretty Boy survived every hardship, from enemy attacks to internal conflict. But the real challenge had yet to come. The challenge wasn't conquest. It was holding on to what was slowly falling apart. Time passed. The group that once seemed unbreakable had now fractured. Mr. T and Kinky Tail were operating separately, while the other 4, Pretty Boy, Makulu, Rasta, and Scar, defended what was left of their territory. The unity that made them an unstoppable force had started to crumble. The world around them was changing. The weight of past battles began to wear down their spirits. Pretty Boy stayed close to Makulu. They were more balanced and less reckless than the others. Rasta grew quieter. Scar limped from an old injury that never healed. The power they had built with yesterday's brutality now felt more like a fading memory than a living force. Their movements became fewer. They were no longer seeking expansion, but protection of what little remained. Yet new threats were already creeping toward them. Young coalitions began testing their strength. Roars of unfamiliar males echoed from beyond the borders, louder and more challenging than before. The wild no longer feared the Mapogo as it once did. Though they were still seen as legends of strength, the cracks in their ranks were undeniable. Pretty Boy felt it, as if the land itself whispered the calm before the storm. It was no longer about blood, it was about legacy. And as he patrolled the edges of his kingdom, he realized that the shadows closing in were not from outside, but from time itself. They had ruled for a long time. Now their turn had come to face the brutality of stronger, tougher enemies, in a battle that would decide their fate, maybe not now, but soon. The downfall began when Kinky Tail, who had separated from the others, was ambushed by a rival coalition. Though he fought fiercely, he was alone, and they were many. His body was found torn, lifeless. Mr. T responded with fiery rage. He returned alone to avenge his brother, and succeeded in killing one of the attackers, regaining some of his pride. But it wasn't long before he too was surrounded by enemies. He fought to his last breath, roaring until his voice fell silent forever. The Mapogo were now 4. News of 2 deaths spread quickly. Many lions were emboldened to attack the remaining members, especially after the death of the coalition's most savage member, Mr. T. Soon. A new coalition emerged, called the Majingjalain. 4 strong young males who followed in the Mapogo's footsteps, but with youthful hunger and modern warfare tactics. Pretty Boy felt the glory starting to turn against them. Their dominance was beginning to shrink. Then, Rasta suddenly disappeared, likely killed in a skirmish. Soon after, Scar vanished as well. Whether he died or chose exile, no one knew. Only 2 remained, Pretty Boy and Makulu. They roamed together through the remnants of their former kingdom. They were no longer kings, but ghosts, moving silently, avoiding conflict, living on instinct and memory. Pretty Boy no longer sought battle. He sought refuge, peace, a place of safety. But the fierce Majingjalain lions had begun to close in. They were strong, young, and more united than the Mapogo had ever been. Gradually, they took over the prides the Mapogo once ruled. The lionesses shifted their loyalty. Even the land itself seemed to forget who once walked it. Still, Pretty Boy didn't flee far from his former kingdom. He moved silently, choosing solitude over war. After facing death countless times, he now chose life. Their downfall wasn't caused by a single battle, but by a slow collapse of everything they had once built. Pretty Boy didn't survive through strength, but through isolation and extreme caution. He outlived all his brothers. He lived to see the rise and fall of the empire they once built, a force that had terrified everyone. He escaped death more than once, and now he roamed the wild as the shadow of a legend. No pride, no land, no kingdom, but he had preserved his life. In a world where strength is often measured by an early death, survival became the real reward. New lands fell under the rule of the Majingjalain lions. Their roars filled the night. Their scent marked what was once Mapogo territory. But Pretty Boy had learned something none of them yet knew: how to survive, how to live after glory. He hunted when he could, avoided conflict when needed, and stayed on the move. Some lionesses from his old pride still remembered him, even let him approach. The cubs looked at him with curiosity, unaware of who he once was. He didn't need to reclaim a throne. The throne was already gone. What he carried now was something different: knowledge, wisdom, and awareness. The savannah quieted around him. Seasons changed. Rain fell and evaporated. Grass withered and bloomed again. Prey herds migrated across the plains, and Pretty Boy followed from afar. He no longer chased power, he simply existed, with caution and survival instinct. From time to time, he faced younger males. Some challenged him, most ignored him. He fought only when he had to, and rarely with the fierceness of his youth. The years had changed him. His body was leaner, scarred, but in his eyes still sparkled that flame from his younger days. Sometimes he returned to the places he once ruled, the water holes where battles had been fought, the trees where cubs once played, the borders he had marked with his roars. No one recognized him anymore. To them, he was just another lone male, lost. But in the wind, in the rustle of the grass, echoes remained. Faint, perhaps, but real. He had walked through fire, built an empire, lost everything, and still he lived. There were no celebrations waiting for him, no grand return, only a slow journey into the silence he had chosen. In his final days, Pretty Boy walked the edges of forgotten lands. His body slowed, his roar softened, but his eyes still held that same passion for life. Maybe he was no longer the lion he once was, but he was not broken. He entered a new phase of existence, one no longer ruled by dominance, but by wisdom and awareness. He could sense danger before seeing it, move without being seen, preserve energy, let go of things lions usually fight to the death for. He had no pride to defend, no cubs to protect, no land to claim. He had nothing left to prove. Pretty Boy lived for a short time beside a quiet waterhole, visited only by antelope and a few old lionesses. There he found moments of rest, moments of peace. He lay beneath the same stars that once lit his path as a king. In a world that never stops fighting, Pretty Boy became an unforgettable ghost. Despite his long wandering, narrow escapes, withdrawal from war, and solitary walks without fear, his day came. He passed beneath the shade of a tree. No audience, no final roar. He left with the wind, with the dust, leaving behind endless memories. He may not have left a kingdom, or cubs, or a pride bearing his name, but the wild carried his legacy in its plains and hills, as a lion who survived what others couldn't. His story traveled through the savannah, through lionesses who lay beside him, and through the memories of the Mapogo era. Young lions who came after him never saw him, but they lived in a world he and his coalition helped shape. A world still marked by the fearsome imprint of the Mapogo coalition, and the thrilling, intense details of their lives as one of the greatest lion coalitions ever known. In the end, Pretty Boy wasn't the loudest, nor the most savage or destructive, but he was the one who remained. And in the wild, it is the one who remains who tells the greatest stories.